Welcome to another week's show here at Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. This week, we're going to cover a topic that kind of got spun off from a show I did a number of weeks ago around buzzwords. I had done a whole show on kind of the challenge with buzzwords, slang, or shorthand terms that people use, particularly if they're in the know. It's sometimes used to make people feel like they're smarter than somebody else. Well, one of you wrote me an email that wasn't talking about so much about the buzzwords, but also buzz phrases. Multiple words strung together that kind of make it think like you should know what they mean, but do you really know what they mean? And so that is what the topic of today's show is going to be about. Not about buzz phases as as a generic term, but one in particular, one that a number of you have talked to me about over many years, asking for my definitions or how they should think about it. So what is this term? It is out-of-the-box thinking. Now, out-of-the-box thinking is a term that really came into vogue in the 1970s, 1980s, with management consulting firms like McKinsey and Deloitte and any of the other big six firms. So what does it really mean? Well, first of all, you may not have heard it as out-of-the-box thinking. Sometimes it's referred to as thinking out of the box. Now, if you're from Australia, you may say thinking out of the square. And again, this is a term that consultants like to throw around, is like, oh, if you really want to drive innovation, then you need to be able to think out of the box. Well, what does it mean? It's a slang term, and rarely do the consultants provide with any practical guidance on what does it mean and what is it you can do to think out of the box. And so that is what we're going to talk about today, and that is giving you practical things that you can do to satisfy this desire to think out of the box, think out of the normal mode of thought. And so first off, let's rewind here and let's talk about, where did the term come from? How did thinking out of the box come to be as a term used particularly in the innovation space or creativity space or idea generation space? Get your best and brightest, and we need to think out of the box. We're going to talk about what that means and what it takes and how you should think about your thinking and thought processes so that you do think differently. So let's hop into this. What's the history of this term? Well, this term is kind of this vague set of words that have just gotten thrown together over the years. So in this case, this definition is that thinking outside the box, it's a metaphor. It means to think differently. It means think unconventionally or from a new perspective. Well, again, great. What does it mean, and where did this originally come from? Well, where it came from was from some management consulting practices looking at how do you think differently? How do you solve problems in a way that others may not think of? So this thinking out of the box term was attached to this concept of the 9-dot problem. The 9-dot problem being a 3x3 grid of dots formed in the shape of a square. So you have 9 dots. Now here's the challenge. In these 9 dots, you can draw a line. You want to draw a line through all 9 dots, the fewest number of lines, without lifting your pen and without over tracing a previous line. So that's the problem statement. Of the 9 dots, what you want to do is draw the fewest number of lines through all 9 dots without lifting your pen and not tracing over a previous line. So, how many lines do you think you can use to get through this, to solve this problem? Go through all 9, don't lift your pen, no overtracing it, and you must go through all 9 dots. Now, many of us have seen this 9-dot problem before, but the concept back when it was first created is that the 9 dots form a box, right? And we typically get this mental model of, well, how do I draw the lines, right, that get me through this, through all 9 of that, through all the dots that make up this box? Well, the title of today's show should give you a little bit of a hint to the solution. How do you think outside the box? How do you get an out-of-the-box thinking to solve this problem? So, let me show you some of the solutions to this problem. There's a number of different ways for you to solve the problem. You can do 4 lines, right? So you kind of make the triangle, and then the 4th line goes the diagonal the other way, catching that one leftover dot. Now, many people thought that this was kind of the magic answer, the 4 lines, until someone came up with 3 lines, drawing lines very wide outside the box so that you could slope the line, like in the case of the 3 middle dots, where you hit the top of the dot, the middle of the dot, and the bottom of the dot as the line traces across. So it's 3 lines, you've touched all 9, and then somebody solved the 9-dot problem with 1 line. That just happens to be a very fat line. Think of it as like a very fat marker that is the width of the 3 dots that you just swipe down. So you're able to solve the 9-dot problem with 1 line. Now, if you've been a long-time listener to this show, you've heard me give the challenge of answering the question, what is half of 13? Right? So if you answered the question 6.5, great. If we were giving a math test, you'd get an A. In the innovation test, I'd give you maybe a C minus. Why? Because you solved it with one answer, and you took the obvious answer. In the innovation space is looking for all the different ranges of possible answers, and that's important. So in the case of what is half is 13, what are all the different various answers you can give? Well, if I wrote it out as 1 and 3, you split it vertically, 2 different digits. If I wrote it out as Roman numeral 13 and I split it vertically, it's 11 and 2, right? There's 13 cards in a deck of cards. The middle card is what card, right? There's thousands of different ways to answer questions like this. And the key is whether you're solving a 9-dot problem or you're solving a half of 13 type of a problem, is to not stop at what is the most obvious answer, or to even throw the towel in and say, it doesn't have an answer. Part of thinking out of the box is to think differently. Think about the problem, with understanding the definition of the problem. Now, the original problem for the 9-dot problem was what? Draw lines for all 9 dots, making sure that you, the fewest number of lines, and the lines don't trace over themselves, right? And so, in this case, it didn't say stay within the confines of the box. That is a mental block we had. When you saw the 9 dots, you saw the square, you don't naturally think beyond the edges of the square. You think of that as a constraining factor. It wasn't a constraining factor in the definition of the problem. It was not a constraining factor in the set of the rules that you had to follow to solve the 9-dot problem. It's a natural mental rule that we immediately apply. So this gets to things like visual bias. That will trigger us to assume something that just is not there. That's what locks us into conventional thinking versus unlocking us to thinking outside the box. So, whenever you're looking at a problem and you're trying to solve it, or you're trying to create a new opportunity, or to innovate something totally radically different, this is what is meant by thinking outside the box. Not just the 9-dot problem, but to not get stuck in the mental thought processes and the biases that we all naturally have, and to think differently. So, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how do you think differently, how do you think unconventionally, and how do you form a new perspective. And in fact, In the case of the forming new perspective, that is going to be a future episode. So today we're going to talk about differentially and unconventionally. How do you think differently and unconventionally when it comes to thinking such that you can think, quote, outside the box, which is really around how do you solve the problem in a unique and different way. And this, we're going to now go through, at least initially, what I want to share with you is around thinking styles. Thinking styles, we each have our own style, how we just naturally are wired, how our brains think. And it's important that even before you try to say you need to think differently, the question you have to answer is, how do you think now? What is it that is your preferred style when it comes to thinking? So there are a variety of different thinking styles. There's synthesis, there's idealist, there's pragmatist, there's analysis, and there's realists. And what we're going to cover today is I'm going to go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. And then I'm going to ask you the question, which one are you? And that's an important question. You can't start contemplating how are you going to think differently if you are not aware with what your own preferential thinking style is. So let's hop right into this. So synthesis, what is a synthesis? Synthesis stand out with their creativity, with their curiosity, just that natural drive. They're open to all kinds of ideas and views and opinions and possibilities. They're open to a wide range of kinds of ideas, things that that made it just kind of tickle their fancy. It's an interesting type of people. I would argue that I actually fall into a little bit of this, and this is an important part. As we go through this, you may actually be kind of a combination of two. You don't have to fit into one clear bucket. You just have to recognize yourself in these definitions. Who are you and what are your thinking styles? Because this is an important input to know how you should or could be thinking differently. Next up are idealists. Idealists are always working towards the big goal. They're setting the bar really high. The thing with idealists is not only do they set the bar high for themselves, but they set it high for everybody else that's involved in the project. Now, for them, their satisfaction comes from if it's harder, it's better. If it's a bigger hurdle that we have to get over, that's great. Idealists are also great at pulling teams to achieve something that everybody thought was impossible, that nobody would ever be able to achieve. So an idealist, albeit they can be a little frustrating, if that's your thinking style, you provide a key catalyst to achieve way abnormal, beyond any expectations kinds of success. Next is pragmatists. Pragmatists, they take the logical approach to problem solving. They tend to be focused on the immediate results. They don't think about the long-term kind of 5 years out or even 3 years out. They're dealing with the here and now. They don't look at that long term. They tend to be driven by quarterly or annual kind of achievements. They tend to be very good at managing up within organizations. They're just practical. They're the pragmatists. Then there's the analysts. Analysts are interested in the facts, the data points. They have a clear procedure for doing things. They love data. They love information. They also love processes and procedures. They love writing them, and they love executing them. They love measuring them. They're big on metrics. These are the analysts, right? The satisfaction for them comes from executing a process and then seeing it achieve an objective. Some analysts that you may be familiar with would be people within your organization that are project managers or program managers. These are the ones that define a process for managing a project, then they run the process of managing the project, they apply metrics to know they're on track for the project, and then when the project delivers in the end, they're high-fiving themselves. It's like, woohoo, we got it, we did it, we achieved the objective. And in some cases, that's the right measurement. That's the right way to think about it. In other cases, they may get so wound up on the processes, they lose the perspective of, yeah, the project was achieved and achievement was it was on time within budget, but maybe they didn't think about the achievement on the impact that it was going to have on customers or on success of the business or whatever. And the other thinking style is the realists. The realists are the perfect problem solvers. They tackle problems head on. They don't feel challenged by kind of the everyday conundrum or ambiguity. They see a problem and they go after it. These are the people within your organization who just get stuff done. They just get it done. They just knock it out of the park. They deliver, and that's where their focus tends to be at. They are the engine. They are the people within a project or a program who just get this stuff done. They push through no matter what the hurdles or the barriers. Now, the downside for these types of people is either you're going to help them achieve it or you better get out of the way. You know, they will leave a couple of bruised egos and some stepped on toes, and as this project, as it's making success. So those are the thinking styles. So there's the synthesist, right, that we talked about. And who is the synthesist? The synthesist is those people who are, looking at, they take it all in, they like the info, they're open to ideas, etc. The idealists are they're the ones setting the bar, they're the ones that are working for the big goal. These are the people who like big, hairy, audacious goals. The pragmatists, they take the logical approach. They're trying to solve the near-term immediate. They're not big into long-term. Then there's the analysts, right? The analysts are interested in facts and data points, etc. And then you've got the realists. These are the perfect problem solvers. They tackle a problem. If you give a well-defined problem statement to a realist, then you should just get out of the way because they're gonna crush it. This just reinforces the importance of doing an excellent job at defining the problem. So, again, synthesis, idealist, pragmatist, analyst, and realist. So great. Who are you? Which one of these define you? Now, that doesn't mean that you are stuck in that mode of thinking, that you are stuck in, how do I think differently? I'm a near-term guy and I'm supposed to be doing innovation. How do I do that? Or I'm an up-and-coming executive woman who's trying to drive success on long term, but I've got to solve near-term, quarterly, annual objectives. That's how I get measured. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to think differently. You need to know your thinking style, which is what we were talking about now. This is your thinking style. Now the question is how do you think differently? Knowing your style, how do you think differently to achieve success? How do you think differently? How to think differently is the key question when it comes to being challenged to, quote, think outside the box. So once you know your thinking style, you know your strengths, you know your natural style, and you also have identified your blind spots. If you tend to be more near term, then how do you push yourself to think long term? If you're more of the dreamer, how do you become more of the pragmatist? Because you need to have a variety. You can't just stick with your normal, comfortable thinking style. So, what I'm going to share with you here are 7 ways to think differently. 7 ways to think differently. And key here is not to listen and cherry pick the one you think is the right one to be, quote, an innovation person. You need to do all 7. Now, some of these are not going to come naturally to you. Some of them are going to be challenging. You need to do all of them. So you need to force yourself through these blind spots. At the end, I'm going to share with you some helpful hints on how do you force yourself to apply all 7 of these thinking approaches to make sure that you don't have a blind spot. Okay? So let's get started. So the first one is what I would call cultivate strategic thinking, right? Strategic thinking can simplify difficult and challenges and prepare for uncertainty. Strategic thinking gives you a plan. You're thinking about the what ifs, what could happen, what might be. And by just simply thinking about it, you are miles ahead of any potential opportunities or problems as they crop up. It's asking yourself constantly, what if? What if a pandemic happens? What happens if our supply chain totally blows up? What happens if there's a sudden shift in customers who no longer want to leave their home, right? Constantly running through these strategic thinkings of what if scenarios prepares you, because what happens? When one of those what if happens, you are way ahead because you've already thought about it. You thought about the answers that you would apply to those based on that what if. So that's how you prepare yourself. Cultivate a strategic thinking approach by constantly asking you those what ifs. It allows you to prepare for those uncertainties. And if you're not comfortable with, well, what if what, right? What do you answer? What if everything? Everything that you would have as part of your assumption, what if the opposite were true? What if it was different? What if things that you would just think were outrageous would happen or never happen? What are they? That is strategic thinking. The next is to engage in inquisitive thinking. Now, I'm going to guess you are not surprised to hear me say, question everything. My entire career has been built on asking questions. Asking the questions in such a way to cause other people to think differently, to look at the problem differently. Asking questions is absolutely critical. But it's not just about asking questions in a brainstorming session or an ideation workshop or an innovation boot camp. It's about questioning everything, everything. And when you question, you gain information, you gain knowledge. And when you gain knowledge, you can have an impact because that knowledge is input into the ideas or into the innovations or into the problems that you're trying to solve. You have to question everyone and everything, particularly about assumptions, right? What are the assumptions under which your business operates? What are your assumptions under what your industry operates? What are your assumptions under the way your government operates? Question everything. And that's alone, this one thing will give you a leg up on innovation and your own personal creativity. Question everything. If you're not sure about what questions to ask, you can take the 48 questions that are in my book, Beyond the Obvious, or you could get the killer question card deck. I've covered that here on the show, and in fact, if you go over to beyondtheobvious.com, which is the book site, all 48 questions are up there in the form of blog posts. You can search for them. You can search for questions, types of questions on Google. People have collected up entire libraries of questions. Collect yourself up a good set of questions. I have one of my moleskins, which is just my question notebook, where if I hear a really good, interesting, inquisitive question, I add it to the notebook. And then I'll just go through those and ask them of myself. You've heard me ask them of guests on the show. I've asked them in the form of my teams. So questions. The value of that library of questions for you that you can ask yourself that causes you to think, that causes you to look kind of that beyond that, the obvious answer, beyond the obvious next step is absolutely critical. The other is to explore what I call big picture thinking. Now, big picture thinking, particularly if you're an analyst and you're into the deep end of the thinking process, the key here is sometimes you just need to take a step back. You need to kind of just take a breather. You need to gain a broader perspective. One way to do this is what I call an exercise of walk in their shoes. So sometimes when you're on maybe a product side or you're delivering a product or services and you see it from your side, you only see it from your side. To gain that big picture thinking, some cases maybe you need to step in the shoes of your customer. Maybe you need to step in the shoes of your supplier. Maybe you need to step in the shoes of some other part of an ecosystem critical to your success. Do a day in the life, map it out. It's what some people would call an experience journey. Create a journey map for that particular person. How do they go through and experience it? Gives you perspective, gives you that view that you just didn't have before. So sometimes you just take a step back and do that big picture thinking. Thinking about your industry, thinking about maybe a part of the ecosystem that supplies your industry. Get that perspective. Sometimes we just get so deep in the weeds, so deep in our own problems, so deep in our own challenges, or what we think is an opportunity, and we lose perspective. Exploring big picture thinking is about getting that perspective back, getting out of the details, going back up to 30,000 feet, and then think about, what does it look like from up here? What is it that's different? What is it that I can't see when I'm down at 5 feet level? How do I get back to a 30,000 foot view? That becomes kind of that critical step of really trying to unlock a view of something that you just haven't seen, looking at something with kind of those fresh eyes. Acting as a customer. I share a story many times, and I've shared it on the show, you've probably heard it, about me standing in a Best Buy store watching customers buy my products when I was Chief Technology Officer at Hewlett Packard. That perspective of talking to a customer and seeing how they actually bought, and seeing the discussion they may have had with their friend or family member standing next to them, like, do you think this is a good product, or do you think that's a better product? Nothing is more valuable than getting a different perspective than sitting at your desk and thinking you know it all. Because guess what? Nobody knows it all. Another thinking strategy that you should focus on is harnessing focus thinking. I talk about focus a lot. Talk about focus in the problem statement. Focus thinking kind of shuts out the operations. Get away, lock yourself away. No distractions, just thinking. In some cases, people don't like doing that because they think that they're not productive. They think, oh, I'm not doing anything. I need to be doing something. I can't sit still. Use this episode as an excuse. The next time your boss comes by and you're just sitting there thinking, say, oh, no. I'm listening to this show. Phil McKinney, CTO for HP, tells me I need to spend amount of time just focused thinking. Use me as the excuse. Lock yourself away. Go away. Bill Gates goes away for a 1 week vacation. He takes a pile of books to read. That's all he does is just think. You need thinking time. If Bill Gates needs thinking time, you need thinking time. So go lock yourself away by yourself, no distraction, no music, disconnect from the internet, and just think. Focused thinking. How do you think differently? One is to utilize risk-oriented thinking. Now, as a leader, you need to think big. You need to dream bigger than most. You have to be out there. Whether that's your role as a leader of teams or as the leader of ideas. You need to think big. You need to go big. Now, one of the things that we tend to apply to these kinds of activities is we mentally apply a risk model to the ideas. Like, this is going to be really expensive. Or, wow, I don't know how we would ever do that. You need to eliminate that from your thought processes. And that's what this activity is really about. When you say utilize risk-oriented thinking, is to basically say, okay, for this exercise or this effort that I am going to do, I'm going to not put any kind of risk constraints on it, whether that be financial, even legal, even resourcing, or even known technologies, right? If you're a tech-oriented kind of a business, take all the risk constraints off. Utilize a risk-oriented thinking. That's when you want to really get out there. And then you can start applying what you need as you bring ideas forward that says, okay, that's kind of like outside the boundaries, right? But you want to get used to the fact of being comfortable and willing to take risks. Look, if you take the risk, you'll be viewed and admired as a risk taker. Leaders will actually admire you. We're all worried about the slap on the hand or don't do that. You take some risks, and actually your leadership, your boss may come to you and say, wow, guess what? Thumbs up. That was a great approach, right? Because if you dare to do more, if you're willing to break the rules, you'll have more success. Trust me. I've taken risks. I've fallen flat on my face, right? But the fact that I've took some risks is hugely valuable, and it's had a huge impact on my career. So take and utilize a risk-oriented thinking style. The other is rely on shared thinking, right? Now, collaboration in the innovation space is absolutely key. It is not a one-person activity. Teams, people coming together. You need to get that input from others. Now, as much as people think they know it all, or people want to play the smartest person in the room, guess what? You are not the smartest person in the room. Right? I tell this people with my day job. Look, I work with a team of 200 absolutely brilliant people who are very good at that job. And that doesn't vary whether, even the people we hire that man our reception front desk are incredibly good and smart. And many of them have actually moved into even more influential roles within our organization, all the way to the brilliant PhD scientists that we have inside of our organization, right? And I tell people all the time that, look, if you think you're the smartest person in the room in our office, wait 15 seconds and walk down the hallway. You're going to run into somebody smarter than you. You are not the smartest on every subject, so don't think you are. You need to rely on shared thinking. In some cases, we have to go put ourselves in a mental mode that says, something? I'm going to be open to anybody's input, anybody's ideas. Rely on that shared thinking. In some cases, we have to do that as we have to force ourselves as part of a mental exercise. Because if we don't, we tend to kind of close in our own walls. They don't think like me. They didn't agree with my idea. I'm only going to talk to people who agree with my idea. No. You need to rely on shared thinking, collaboration. Having that collaborative thinking mode will absolutely accelerate your ability to come up with new ideas and, to quote, think outside the box. And then the last of the 7 that I wanted to share with you, which was practice reflective thinking. Look, we all love our ideas. I suffer from this as much as you will, or you do today, right? We love our ideas. It's our baby. Don't criticize it. Don't call our baby ugly, right? But in some cases, we have to take a step back. We have to be reflective. We kind of have to get our emotions out of it. We have to take time to not react and not get emotional. So in some cases, we have to practice this reflective thinking. Enables you to we have to distance ourselves. It's an idea you may have come up with, but it's an idea that you're letting go of, that you're letting loose. And you got to be willing and comfortable that in some cases, people may have different ideas and their perspectives. And again, it kind of goes back to shared thinking. You need to have perspective. You got to have that reflective thinking. You got to have all these thinking styles. In some cases, you just got to step back. And that reflective thinking also allows you to see things with a new pair of eyes. Not as the inventor of the idea, but as one that you're trying to nurture and you're trying to secure resources and support for. So again, how do you think differently? Cultivate strategic thinking, engage in inquisitive thinking, explore big picture thinking, harness focused thinking, utilize risk-oriented thinking, rely on shared thinking, practice reflective thinking. You need to do all of these. So how do you do this? Well, one is schedule all 7. Set aside an hour just to do strategic thinking, or an hour to do big picture thinking, or to spend an hour doing risk-oriented thinking. Take it and schedule it. Lock your door, get away, or if you want to do it with other people, invite them in, right? But if you need to do all 7, and if you do all 7, you will be thinking differently, and you will be thinking out of the box. You'll be thinking differently from everybody else. So hopefully that is helpful for you. Now, what I will tell you is this is part of a multi-part series. So if you think we're done on out-of-the-box thinking, we're not. There's more to talk about, and we're going to do that in a future show. So thanks again for joining. If you want to get in contact with me, you can get a hold of me at phil@killerinnovations.com. You've got all the websites, philmckinney.com, killerinnovations.com, beyondtheobvious.com, which is for the book, or you can follow me on social media. Thanks for joining. If you want to stay updated, send me a text, innovation at 44222, or innovation@killerinnovations.com. And we will be back next week. Bye-bye.